Hey friends, welcome to Seeking Stories. My name is Ryan and we're currently working through a read-along of Lord of the Rings. If you haven't joined us before, there is a whole playlist linked at the end of this video where we basically talk about every single chapter of Lord of the Rings. I really want this to be a resource to you, whether you're a first-time reader or this is your 1000th time reading Lord of the Rings. Just to give you a little bit of extra insight as you walk through Tolkien's most famous work, and one of the most famous works in literary fiction of all time. So this chapter is called Chapter 4. It's A Journey in the Dark. It is really where the Lord of the Rings plot from a location perspective starts deviating from The Hobbit from a plot location perspective. Because until this point, both parties of characters had traveled east from the Shire, stopped in Rivendell, gone further east, and tried to cross the mountains. In The Hobbit, of course, they were successful, even though it went in a roundabout way. And here at this point, they were not successful in crossing the mountains, and they literally have to make a choice to go under the mountains. And yeah, I know in The Hobbit they went through the mountains in a way as well, but like it's different. They were captured by orcs, and it wasn't truly under them. It was through goblin tunnels. And not only that, but things happen in the Mines of Moria, specifically in the next chapter, that don't happen in The Hobbit. Things go, shall we say, a little bit south. But the first thing I want to talk about is the necessity of going through the Mines of Moria. One of the things that I absolutely can't stand in a lot of stories is when characters make decisions that seem dark and dangerous when they had other options to at least try. And in this case, they didn't. And you have the characters debate. And that's one of the things I love about Lord of the Rings 2 is the characters debate. You have characters from different perspectives, all with similar end goals. They all want to save the world from Sauron, but different perspectives on how to do that, and even different perspectives among the characters that respect each other on what to do next. They tried to cross the mountains, that didn't work. They realized that the weather is being controlled by the enemy, and they will literally freeze to death or fall into avalanches, and their quest will end there. So the mountain defeats them, and they have to make a choice. They can either go back to Rivendell, in which that case they know that they will not be able to set out again because of the way that the presumed war is progressing. Basically, at that point, Rivendell will be under siege and the ring will not be able to set out. Rivendell may stand for a while, but it will fall. So they can't go back. They could go south, but going south takes them through the Gap of Rohan. And basically, based on this map here, you'll see it's a little tiny gap in the mountain chains. And it takes them right by the wizard Saruman, who Gandalf talks about in the Council of Elrond. And we know that Saruman has turned to the dark side. And going anywhere near there is to risk, almost as great a doom as Sauron, because Saruman is also looking for the ring. So that is an option, and it could theoretically work, but it's such a risky option. The other option is to go through the abandoned dwarf mines and city of Moria, or Dwerodwelf, as the dwarfs called it way back in the day. And I love it because you have Gandalf and Aragorn, who are two of the most wisest characters. They're debating with each other what to do or not. And, Aragorn says, beware, Gandalf, if we go into the mines, this probably won't go well. Aragorn and Gandalf have gone through the mines before, and Aragorn doesn't even want to talk about it. He's like, the memory was very black. So you have these characters forced into a situation where they have to make a choice, and they choose a bad decision that's probably the best decision. And again, that's one of the great things about Lord of the Rings is they're characters who make choices that are really, they're not great choices, but the other choices, the alternates, are worse. It's at risk no matter what way they go. And you can see that in the kind of the eyes of characters like Pippin, who says, "I wish I had taken Elrond's advice. I am no good after all. I don't ever remember feeling so wretched." You had a character like Pippin who begged and pleaded to go on this quest. He said that if he was left behind, he would just follow of his own accord. And here he's saying, "I wish I would have stayed home, guys." We understand it's bad when a character, put everything on the line to go on his quest, has the humility to say, maybe I was wrong. One of the great things about Moria, though, is that it gives a little bit more into the culture and history of Middle-earth. At the top, as high as Gandalf could reach, was an arch of interlacing letters in an elvish character. Below, though the threads were in places blurred or broken, the outline could be seen of an anvil and a hammer, surmounted by a crown with 7 stars. Beneath these again were 2 trees, each bearing crescent moons. More clearly than all else, there shone forth in the middle of the door a single star with many rays. "These are the Emblems of Durin, and there is the high tree of the elves, and the star of the house of Fëanor." It harkens back to a different time, a time when elves and dwarves were much more friendly. in a time where, as Gandalf says, that the doors stood wide open and travel, trade, and commerce and friendship commenced between the elves and the dwarves. And such a fierce animosity has risen between these two cultures. You know, they're really on two different sides of, you know, the character spectrum. They're very different types of characters. They were created differently. They have different mentalities, different desires, and they just don't trust each other for reasons I won't go into right now. But it's such an interesting contrast and comparison because Moria is such a dark place, like literally and figuratively. But at the time, the entryway to Moria was symbolic of a time when elves and dwarves had a friendship. So it's also symbolic that an elf and a dwarf passed through these doors together. And I love this moment. I know people who love the books and love the movies love this moment too, where Gandalf is trying every single spell he knows to open the door of the gates of Moria. And in the end, he says, "I had only to speak the elvish word for friend, and the doors open. Quite simple. Too simple for a learned lore master in these suspicious days. Those were happier times." And this is summed up a little bit further along when Gimli sings that song of Moria, the ancient happier times. And not that every time it doesn't have its own dark moments. I mean, good news, if you read like the Silmarillion, the first age of Middle-earth, crap happened there that I would argue is way worse than what happens in Lord of the Rings. I feel like Lord of the Rings may be more of a global doom going on, but the stuff that went down the Silmarillion like was bad. But here, you know, Gandalf says, you know, too simple for the learned lore masters. Gandalf, over the last however many thousands of years, has become such an expert in all things lore. And I'm sure Gandalf being a Mire, kind of a lesser god in a way, coming to Middle-earth as a wizard to help defend against the enemy, you know, that's, you know, it's a little bit of a downgrade, so to speak. Too simple for learned lore masters in these suspicious days. Those were happier times. And again, I try to kind of keep things in Middle-earth and not try to say its applicability in its own world, because I feel like that's up to you to discover here. But I see that, you know, in my own life as well as I'm growing older, just, you know, to have the happier, innocent moments of children. And not that you have to be a child to understand those innocent moments, but just those moments where there's not as much cynicism or sarcasm or just angst. And where just truly speak friend and enter, the simplest password to one of the greatest kingdoms of the world. Like anyone could figure that riddle out and anyone could know it. It just gives you a lot to think about. It has such a rich layer to this world of Middle-earth. I'm gonna cut it here. I haven't talked about the Watcher in the Water, that beast that attacks Frodo, the actual journey through the dark, where, you know, we get a little more history, and we just kind of see the darkness and depression of going through a destroyed world in a way, in a world that is totally, you know, enclosed with darkness. So let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you tomorrow with the crazy, hectic chapter that is the Bridge of Khazad-dûm.